You're tuned to Mission Driven, volunteer powered, WMNF Tampa, where music, news, and culture collide.
You are tuned to WMNF Radio 88.5 FM here in Tampa, Florida. This is the Community Public Affairs program called Community Speaks, and I'm your host, Patro Mobili. Of course, this is an opportunity to speak with you about what is happening in your world as we continue to sort out the outcome of the elections and what message or mandate was sent. 45 continues to pick his made-for-TV cabinet. It is clear to any political watcher its fear of economic crisis and upsetting Wall Street. That is a powerful constraint on a dictator, strongman. The choice of Scott Bessent for Treasury Secretary is an attempt at tamping down fears arising from his promised tariff wars. And also, as the world continues to turn, war burns in the Middle East and in the middle of Europe, with wannabe dictator fearing for their political positions in the world. It leads to more war and economic recession. That's what I think. And so also, as workers go on strike in a critical holiday travel seasons, there is evidence workers are generally feeling resentful as bosses like Elon Musk are trying to get workers to quit by issuing return to office mandates. Resentment is building as more workers feel stuck. And as we continue to ponder how voters voted to return a problematic figure to the White House and deepen the one-party state, the voting bloc most responsible for voting GOP were the Christian Protestant vote, who broke overwhelmingly for 45. And we're going to start seeing that in some of the proposed legislation. We're seeing it in some red states already, with the 10 Commandments being forced to be set in schools. Jewish vote broke overwhelmingly for Vice President Harris. And I have to hasten to say, Madam Vice President Harris is already a historic figure. She garnered almost half of the electorate and kept 45 from reaching far beyond 50%. And she's already made history. She deserves her place in it and not relegated to the margins of history. And here, though, we will continue to empower the voices of the politically marginalized, and we will be especially vigilant of the human rights of the trans community, since they were the main scapegoat thrown under the bus by the far right wing and now even some Democrats. And there is a vicious floor fight in Congress targeting the one elected trans member of Congress and her use of the bathroom. So here in Florida, though, the governor has been called the most unhappy Republican in the country. He is already being seen as a lame duck, but he won't be any ordinary lame duck. We'll talk more about that. And his power is diminishing, and he lost his Amendment 1 attempt to turn school board elections and campaigns partisan, but his fight against the other two amendments that were placed on the ballot by you and I, by the people, he spent a lot of state money fighting it. A lot of taxpayer funds went towards fighting those two amendments that also had majority support but failed under the 60% rule to change the Constitution, to amend the Constitution here in Florida. So we could talk about all of those issues, the voting bloc that we don't talk a whole lot about, the Christian right. Will their laws continue to show up? Their ideas continue to show up in law. This idea of not separating church from state, and school boards was a place that they've been fighting, running their ideas up the political flagpole to see if it sticks, and using the school boards as their bully pulpit to force these ideas on people, to politically marginalized people, especially the LGBT community, especially the trans community. All of these fights that we are seeing, these culture wars, were taking shape on school boards. And the governor tried to turn it partisan, so it'd be easier to attract people to run on those culture war issues for school board. And I guess that's a way of nationalizing politics, the right-wing politics in this country. And it seemed to work because, a lot of people across ethnicities, except for Jews, went and voted to return 45 back to the White House and that whole cabal. And we're seeing with the new cabinet being named, a lot of the times that people were accusing 45's campaign of preparing this country to implement Project 2025. He denied it during the campaign, but now we're seeing in his picks that a lot of the authors of Project 2025 are getting jobs under this incoming administration. And we could talk about all of the people who are being named and how Project 2025 will take shape going forward as we're seeing the truth reveal itself in these picks. We could talk about some of the other picks and how when we look at a dangerous world, just what kind of dangers lurk when we look at Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. She's been called a Russian asset. And now, because I guess this relationship with Russia that's going on the right in this country, this former Democrat who now turned Republican and has been accused of echoing Russian propaganda, is now going to be the Director of National Intelligence if Congress approves it. Of course, we've heard a lot in the mainstream about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and he was once on Fox News, and he's now been picked as nominee for Defense Secretary, and he's been accused of some of the same things that 45 himself have been accused of, and that is sexual, having some allegations put forward against him, and but his friendship with 45 and his regular appearances on Fox makes him perfect for him, I guess, in this made-for-TV cabinet. If confirmed, he would bring this top job in a series of crises that are going to be faced in this country, ranging from Russia's war with Ukraine and the ongoing attacks in the Middle East by Iranian proxies to the push for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah, and escalating worries about the growing alliances between Russia and North Korea. With Hegseth at the helm, who knows what's going to happen? He was the author of The War on Warriors, Behind the Betrayal of the Men Who Keep Us Free. That book was published earlier this year, but we'll see if he gets nominated. I mean, if he gets confirmed by the Senate. But most of these people are most likely to get confirmed and not back out because of any allegations against them. But it's the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, that I think shows, at least to some extent, his fears, 45's fears of economic crisis. And to pick this guy, he's founder of the hedge fund, some hedge fund, and he's worked on and off with George Soros, he's a pariah of the right. They hate him because he has taken the right on and pushed a lot of their falsehoods and lies and contradictions in their faces. And basically, he's been their whipping boy for years. And now 45 has chosen this guy who once worked with the Soros Fund Management. He's worked there on and off since 1991. If confirmed by the Senate, he would be the first openly gay Treasury Secretary. So that was an interesting choice, clearly showing 45's fear of economic crisis, which is fears that most strong men, including Vladimir Putin in Russia, fears. These are the things that they fear most. And when you look at how workers are feeling, despite what was said during the election, whether or not breaking for 45 was the reason whether economic reasons were the reason why most voters broke that way, it's still important to understand how workers are feeling and how workers are going to feel going forward. And that's going to have a big impact on how the next regime responds to workers. We know that the right very rarely, if ever, cares about workers unionizing. And so it'd be interesting to see if union busting continues. But just workers generally are feeling resentful. They said workers in the U.S. are feeling like they're running in place, just sort of feeling stuck in the jobs with dim prospects of advancement. They're seeing fewer opportunities to jump ship for something better. And that's a real sharp contrast to the heady days of 2022 during the pandemic, when employers were quitting their jobs at record high rates, what we were calling the Great Resignation, taking that opportunity to switch jobs, taking advantage of opportunities that might be coming their way, looking at the terrain as it was at the time, the idea of being able to work from home more permanently, that works better in this modern era when people are trying to balance so much life work, not just raising children, but taking care of elder parents and grandparents at times. There's so many things that people have to do to balance their work life, that working from home after the pandemic was almost a blessing in disguise. But this is also in a time when bosses are trying to force people back into the office. Not that they need them to come back to the office, but it's an attrition trick to try to get people to quit if they don't want to come back to the office. But the big picture, employers are sitting tight. According to some economists, companies aren't making big changes to hiring strategy right now. That means fewer opportunities for workers to climb the career ladder. And so workers are, in the meantime, still plugging away at the same old jobs and the same old role they've had for years without the opportunity to move up internally or at any new company. 65%, that's over half of the 3,400 professionals that were surveyed by this particular surveyor, Glassdoor, which is a job site company. Last month, they said that these workers, these professional workers, say they feel stuck in their current jobs. And as workers feel stuck and pent up, resentment starts to boil over. And all of that's taking place, of course, under the surface, because nobody wants to let on that they're unhappy. They don't want to show unhappiness in front of the boss, because people are trying to preserve the jobs that they have, no matter how unhappy they are feeling or how stuck they're feeling right now. But unemployment still remains relatively low. People aren't jumping ship without finding a new job. The job market on the surface looks good, but when you look under the hood, things are stagnating. The rate at which workers quit their jobs in September was almost 2%. That was the lowest since June of 2020, according to these economists, outside of COVID, a level last seen in 2015. This is what we're seeing right now. It's only 2%, pretty low level of quitters, people quitting their job. But it's well off the highs of the Great Resignation a few years ago. But how are you feeling in this moment? And how do you continue to try to sort out what mandates were sent, how voters voted and how you voted, and what you see going forward when you look at these particular picks? We just going to stagnate politically as well as economically? I want to hear from you. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. There have been so many changes taking place politically in this country. And over the last 10 years, we've seen a decade of racial justice activism transforming politics in this country, and it continues to have an impact. I think a lot of what we're seeing out of white voters were in reaction to that. Even the violence on January 6th was an attempt at justifying that violence by looking at the outrage and outpouring of sentiment when people hit the streets after George Floyd's killing right in the streets in Minneapolis. So after Michael Brown's fatal shooting by police over a decade ago, it set off a week of protests in Ferguson, Missouri. Ever since then, we've seen so many times when when people have had to come out and make a statement, a gesture of outrage at police behavior in this country. And people are also looking at it. We're going to go forward on what we've learned, or we're going to start going backwards on these issues, especially issues of racial justice in this country. And a lot of voters, a lot of black voters feel alone politically on these issues because the election showed that a lot of people no longer want to talk about the issues of racial injustice, and at the same time digging deeper into racism. We're at a crossroads right now. It looks like we're going two different directions right now in this country, and including when you talk about the issue of human rights and all of the people who were scapegoated during the election, where we have a lot to really sort out in this country. There are a lot of activists who are winning, who went from proclaiming Black Lives Matters to running for seats in state houses and city halls and prosecutors' offices in Congress and winning, some people. And local legislation has been passed to do everything from dismantling prisons and jails and reforming schools to eliminating hair discrimination, of all things, which, another form of discrimination that occurs. But at least 30 states and Washington, D.C. have enacted laws meant to curb abusive conduct since 2020, according to the Brennan Law, the Brennan Center for Justice. While the last decade of racial justice activism transformed politics, landmark reforms remain elusive. More than 36 activists, elected officials, and political operatives told the Associated Press, who have been trying to itemize what has happened since 2011 up to the recent years on the issues of racial justice. And there's a new generation of black activists who are wielding cell phones. They wrote the national conversation on policing, questions of public safety and racial justice, pushed it into the center of American politics. Police body cameras are widespread. Tactics including chokeholds have been outlawed. But we still see, some cops trying to buck the system and do things like that anyways. But at least 150 reforms have passed in localities and states over the last 10 years since those first outpourings in the streets against what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and on to George Floyd in 2022. That movement was again had thrust that issue into politics. And that was a situation in which we did see a police officer prosecuted. When Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd in May of 2020, ended up getting prosecuted. And it led to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to have banned chokeholds and no-knock warrants, like the one that led to the Louisville police killing of Breonna Taylor in her home. And that would have created a database listing officers disciplined for gross misconduct. With the new administration come in, any attempts at these reforms could go backwards. People are being very vigilant about what is happening there. We could talk more about that in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, getting back closer to home, and not just about the nominees that's going to go into the new cabinet, but looking at DeSantis's influence in his final years in office here in Florida. A lot of the incoming legislative leaders, they're beginning to take their oath of office, and they know that this is going to mark Governor Ron DeSantis' last 2 years, his final 2 years at the helm. And so far, he's been at the helm of a unified GOP with control over the state capitol. And many of what happens in this state, he's been very undemocratic at times. He fired people, Democrats that he didn't like, which looks like just going after your political enemies, which should not even be allowed. But governors oftentimes are like little fiefdoms. They see their states as fiefdoms, and he's like a king that seems to do anything if he controls enough of the checks and balances, and right now the biggest check is the state Supreme Courts, and he seems to have stacked that in his favor. But in his final 2 years, what will happen? And will legislators begin to stand up to him because they don't see him as a typical lame duck governor? This state is the country's third most populous state. And this governor has cemented his reputation as a national testing ground for conservatism, from restricting abortion to expanding school vouchers and defending gun rights. And he's shown himself willing to take the bully pulpit and wield the veto pen. And he's built a reputation for pushing the boundaries of executive power. And what he does with the funds, the taxpayer money in this state, we've seen him use it to send migrants. He went and picked some migrants up out of Texas, brought him here temporarily so that he could use the taxpayer funds, have a justification for using taxpayer funds to bust them all the way up to Martha's Vineyard. And it doesn't seem, again, none of that seems to have been a failing or caused the Republican Party to have to answer for anything. And like I said, very rarely do they get held accountable for their political acts, while the other side, of course, is always held accountable for everything it does. Even when Joe Biden looked at his watch during a ceremony for military people, that was seen as just unthinkable. But we want to hear more from you. 813-239-9663. What do you expect? How will workers fare as we go forward? And what is the final 2 years in this state looks like with this governor? 813-239-9663 is the number to call. It's 1227 here on Community Speaks. I'm your host, Patro Mobili. And of course, raising these issues, trying to get a feel for what the mandate is. Where are we going forward, and looking at what we expect to see happen as Project 2025 begins to take shape with these nominees. Some of the authors of 2025 are sitting ready to go, and people who were election deniers like Attorney General Pam Bondi. We're going to be seeing these people run the country. We're looking at, of course, Health and Human Services Secretary. What will the Senate do? Will it recognize some of the dangers, or will it just move forward and not try to push back on a chief executive that is not like none other, who has never been held accountable and probably never will be? 813-239-9663 is the number to call. Irene stands ready to take your telephone calls so that we can talk on the air about how you're feeling and where we're going. 813-239-9663. You can also write me, DJ at WMNF.org. That's DJ at WMNF.org. And this is your time to speak. This is Community Speaks on your radio. And we just taking stock of what has happened and what the message is. We're going to go and talk to Russell in Tampa. Go ahead, Russell. Thank you for calling. You're on Community Speaks.
Hey, Mabili, how are you?
Pretty good.
When are you going to have a show about how weak and apathetic Democrats are?
Well, you can talk about that now. How weak are they? And why are they weak? Mm-hmm.
I mean, 35 million Democrats, registered Democrats, did not vote in this last election.
Yeah, that's a lot of people did set out. What do you think the message was? What do you think people want?
They want to feel safe. They want to keep more of their money. They want a border that works. I mean, I think the voters spoke pretty loudly, and you're just cycling through a bunch of old grievances instead of addressing the real issue, which is, why are the Democrats so apathetic and weak?
Well, why do you think that is? I mean, I'm not just trying to overlook these issues. I want you to tell us.
I don't know. I just think that the messaging, well, I can put a guess out there. people like you, no offense, were saying that we're going back to Germany in 1939 and all this. And I just don't think anybody was buying that.
So why do you think workers are feeling apathetic? Or do you think there are people who are feeling politically marginalized who are feeling that way and you just don't care?
No, those people voted for Trump. Trump got the worker vote.
You got just over 50% of the worker vote, and I don't know, I still don't understand that, because workers are saying they feel resentful and apathetic right now, and companies are trying to force people to quit, and they're busting unions. People are still having to go on strike, so I'm not sure exactly why voting...
You're only listening to the whiners. Wages are doing pretty good. The economy, the cost of living is coming around. I think, I think you're lost in a sea of negativity that is not reflective of the general population.
Okay. That's what I'm trying to figure out. What do you feel? What does the general population feel? What did they expect? It seems like the message is still unclear.
I just said what the message is. People want to feel safe in their neighborhood.
They want to feel safe. They want closed borders. I heard that.
They want closed borders, and they'd like to keep more of their money, i.e., lower taxes. I think that those three things are pretty basic. I don't think that's a race thing. I think the black community wants that. The Latino community wants that. Women want that.
What makes you think that's going to happen? I mean, I've heard the right say that a lot. They want to keep more of their money, and it's yet to happen. Even with the tax cuts, 2017, it just seemed to upend the economy. So I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Did you keep more of your money?
No, I didn't feel any difference at all.
What do you mean? You paid your tax rate was lower?
No, it wasn't. I live in a state. I live in a state where there's an income tax. It looks like prices just continue to get higher.
I'm not talking about prices. I'm talking about tax rate.
No, we live in the sales tax state. Tax rate has no meaning to me. Has a lot of meaning to those at the top of the economy. So, you're trying to minimize what one side feels, but you can't maximize what you're trying to say. I'm not exactly understanding what you're saying.
You're always seeing the negative side. If income tax is being a rate of an income tax being lower, means you keep more of your money, really.
I don't feel that. Just like you all said during the campaign, all of this economic activity that's going on, you didn't feel it. So I'm not exactly sure how the average worker felt that tax cut, how the average worker felt like anybody making under $400,000 a year felt anything that had to do with that tax cut. It's just...
It's not a feeling. It's math. I'm not talking about your feelings.
You talk about paychecks. I'm trying to tell you, a lot of people don't report feeling that. Just like they didn't feel the stimulus, and you got a campaign that you just had where you complained about the inflation rate, and all of these things, including the tax cut, fueled the inflation. So it's a contradiction what you're saying.
How does lower taxes fuel inflation?
Lower taxes, I'm saying paying for those lower taxes fueled inflation. I'm saying paying for the stimulus fueled inflation. Somebody had to pay for it.
Well, why wasn't there any inflation during Trump and he had lower taxes?
Because he inherited a great economy. He inherited Obama's economy. Everything was
lowered the taxes, and you said lowering taxes was inflationary. It didn't happen.
It did happen. It lowered taxes. A lot of the people over at the top of the economy did keep more of their money. The corporations kept more of their money, but the average worker, I don't see how they felt any of that.
The inflation was 1.4%. What do you mean I didn't feel that?
It was 1.1% until when? Until the tax break occurred. And then what happened? It rose up to 9% as we started the trade war and started the pandemic and then came out of it. Had
nothing to do with the tax rate. That had to do with the spending. I don't think you understand basic economy.
I think you're purposely trying to make a case that isn't there. You saying it had to do with spending, and that's the problem that this country has, is spending. And who paid for the tax cut?
Do you know what a deficit means?
Yes, I know what a deficit means.
What does it mean?
It means spending more than you have than you take in.
Yes.
Okay, you're not making any sense. You're talking in circles like often you guys always do, and you're trying to minimize the problems in this country, and that's the problem. You're trying to maximize the grievances on the right, and you're trying to minimize the problems that everybody else is feeling, and I don't think you're making as much sense as you think you're making, because those tax breaks, those tax cuts had to be paid by somebody, and it raised the deficit. And maybe you can call back and we can continue that conversation, but let's give somebody else an opportunity to weigh in. Maybe they can help explain what you're saying to me. Stephen in St. Pete, you want to add to this conversation?
Sure.
What is the
anyway, trickle-down economics or Reaganomics doesn't work. And if you go back to the 1920s, when the Republican Party drastically turned their backs on the working class, you had, Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover. Let the good times roll, the roaring 20s, tax breaks for the rich, deregulate Wall Street. And what happened in 1929? Okay, so when FDR comes to power in 1933, he set down the DuPont family and the Rockefeller family and the Ford family and the Morgan family and all the richest families, the billionaire class. He said, if you guys don't start sharing the wealth, they're going to take it from you. We're going to get overthrown. It's that simple. And I got to get people to work. I got to start government programs to get money into the middle class and the lower class. So he raised their corporate tax rate to 90%, and the country flourished. Now, World War II helped the economy in a strange way. But even after that, when you had Harry Truman and you had Kennedy, you had LBJ, the rich were paying higher tax rate. Even under Eisenhower, it was still 90%, a Republican president. And Eisenhower, even during his administration, built the biggest highway program of infrastructure improvement to the United States. And then, like I said, Reaganomics and that philosophy does not work because the debt goes up, the programs that you have in for people in the country that everybody benefits get hurt. So Reaganomics or trickle-down economics to bless the rich with tax breaks. Last year, Walmart and Amazon didn't pay a nickel in corporate income tax, and it's got to stop.
Yeah,
we're heading to $40 trillion debt. So we got to do something. And if you just give more tax breaks to billionaires, the debt is going to keep rising and rising. It has to stop.
And then
or the country's going to implode.
Right.
We're nearing $40 trillion in debt. But that's my opinion.
And then once the cut spending, but you don't go and get it from those who's got it.
Right. You see, like right now, if you took Wall Street, Big Pharma, the fossil fuel industry, the war contractors, and Hollywood, throw them in there, they could probably pay off the debt. I mean, they think that there's about $60 trillion of money that's hidden outside of the United States in offshore accounts, foreign bank accounts, that there's people, the billionaire class, could pay off that $40 trillion. It would hurt them, but they'd still be billionaires, maybe multimillionaires, but they could pay off our debt and balance the budget. And that's why, and it gets back to the old thing. The country does not have the money. They always say we can't pay. How are we going to pay for universal health care? But they never bat an eyelash about giving billions of dollars for wars. You know what I mean?
Right, and for any kind of contract that they think they need to outsource. And that's how Elon Musk got his contract, But
the big thing, Bernie Sanders had the gospel, preached the gospel. It was the FDR gospel. It was the progressive Democrat gospel. And the Democratic Party didn't want anything to do with it.
And that's the problem. They stopped being the party of tax the rich. And it's to their detriment, and being the party of, pro-union workers and just workers in general. They stop being that party.
Right. And see, you had a better working class when you have no country, even your hyper-capitalists, realized, even the Koch brothers, that admitted that universal health care would save the United States trillions of dollars.
Right, they did.
And to have one system that covers you, it doesn't matter if you're 8 weeks old or you're 108, and it would save the country money. But the other programs that are in the United States that's costing us more money because of the tax breaks to the rich. The rich just keep getting richer. I mean, that's almost the history of the human race, and the poor keep getting poorer.
Right.
And if you keep giving tax breaks to the rich, they always think that they're going to provide more jobs. No, they usually cut jobs.
Right.
Reaganomics and trickle-down economics has proven to be a failure. If you go back to the Reagan administration, and people talk about the economy, the working guy, the guy in the street, the hard worker, they're hurting. They're hurting now. They've been hurting for a long time.
Right.
So I just wanted to share that.
I appreciate you, Stephen. And because they won't go and get it from those who's got it, they're going to balance the budget possibly on the backs of the working poor and especially the elderly by going after spending projects, by going after Medicare, Medicaid, especially Medicare. But it's going to be an interesting time as they try to play intellectual jujitsu and explaining themselves, how do you dig the country out of its budgetary crisis, its deficit crisis, without going and getting the rich to pay their fair share? You're going to have to go and get it from those at the bottom, and especially the middle class. The middle class will most likely suffer the most going forward. George in Davenport, you want to add what to this conversation? George, can you hear me? Well, I guess not. We're going to go see what Christina has to add to the conversation. Thank you, Christina, for calling into Community Speaks. Good morning.
Hi. I want to give your show a shout-out, by the way. I called a few weeks ago on the Sunday Forum and made a comment, and I was talking about how the Sunday Forum was one of my favorite shows, and I forgot to tell you that on that day that Community Speaks is one of my favorites.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, you have an awesome show. It's so informative, and, I fact-check everything, and you guys are always right. And Sunday Forum and Midpoint, too. It's just awesome.
Yes.
In any event, a couple things I have to say based on two of the callers that just called. In terms of the economy, for the second to last, first caller, not the last caller, but the one before him, everybody knows that Trump inherited Obama's economy. And that's how it always is. Every president benefits from and inherits the economy from the president that came before him. Mm-hmm. Trump's going to now inherit Biden's economy, right? So this is how it works. And so that's just a myth that Trump built this phenomenal economy in 2016. Now, did people that make over $500,000 a year benefit from Trump's economy in 2016? They absolutely did. And that's something that anyone can Google. These economists from Yale and Harvard have done the math on that. Mm-hmm. And when you think about people that make over $500,000 a year, we're talking about 10% of the country.
Right.
And a lot of times we talk about the 1% who are continuing to get rich on the backs of the working class and middle class. But you don't hear people talk too much about the 10%. And I think they need to be part of the conversation. That being said, going forward, the gentleman who called 2 callers ago, how he said things are going to be so wonderful, why are we so negative?
Yeah.
I feel like so many Republicans pull that card again and again. The minute we start to complain and express what we're worried about, what we're fearful of, all of a sudden we're complainers and we're negative. Well, how else are we going to make change happen? It seems like their expectation going forward, once again, is for us to just fall in line and be complacent and submissive.
Right.
And that's not going to happen.
And all of a sudden, nothing's wrong. During the election, the sky was falling. Right. Now nothing's wrong.
Right, exactly. And as usual, we're the classy ones who have to suck it up and accept, what the results were, and we have. We didn't go storming the Capitol
Right.
like they did, and everybody seems to forget that. Nobody wants to talk about that. And finally, in terms of the economy, what about the working class and middle class? That's what I would have to say to that specific caller. He's saying things are going to be so wonderful. Is he not reading the news? And by news, I mean every bipartisan and partisan and neutral source out there. Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have repeatedly said over the last 2 weeks what they intend to do. They're not being shy about it. They're being absolutely transparent. And they've said their desire, one of their many desires, is to cut 70% of the federal workforce. They want to fire all these people from their jobs. And they've even gone so far to say, well, you know what? What we'll do, we'll push them in the corner and we'll make them all come back into the office, the ones that are remote. That is pure evil. So the caller 2 callers ago, I'd really like to hear what his stance on that is. How do you feel about all of these people? And by the way, people that work remotely, there's a lot of people that benefit from working remotely, and the company doesn't lose anything from that. There are people that have disabilities that have a hard time walking to their car in the morning, so they're sitting at a desk at home all day. There are single moms like myself that benefit from it. There are people. I mean, it's just to do that is just pure evil,
right?
And the companies even say, right? The companies even benefit from it too. They don't have to put the air on. They don't have to do these parties where they're feeding employees. There's lots of benefits for both people on both sides of it. So it's very disturbing to me that that's going to happen. And I'll get off the air now.
It's going to happen for no reason, except they want attrition. They want people to quit.
Yes, they want people to quit. And as far as that gentleman saying, well, we want, when you asked him, it was such a great question, well, what do you want? And he said, well, I want what most people want. I want a safe neighborhood. I want more money in my pocket. I want, it goes back again to the taxes. Well, how does he feel about the fact that, I'm sure maybe he lives in Florida. DeSantis has been not shy about the fact that millions of our recent tax dollars went to his silly TV ads campaigning against Amendments 3 and 4.
Right.
Why am I paying for that? Why are you paying for that, my Billy?
Right.
Why is anybody paying for that?
And he had no outrage about that, right?
Yeah, no outrage about that. I'd love for him to call back and say where he thinks our tax dollars are going, pointing out to where he doesn't want them to go. And then let's have a conversation. I didn't hear that part of the conversation. Let's really talk facts here and do some data analysis. Where do you think our tax dollars are going?
Right.
So, in any event, but thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too, Christina. Thank you. And you said everything just perfectly. Go ahead, Sierra in Tampa. You say what?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you.
Hey.
I really appreciate everything you had to say about everything you said, especially to the first caller, and then the last 2 callers. On board 100%. I am a massage therapist. I've lived in Florida most of my life. I've definitely feel, as a woman in Florida, I'm terrified to live here now. I don't feel safe here anymore. The cost of living due to Ron DeSantis has gone up astronomically because he kept us wide open during the pandemic and made it so all these people moved here who love Trump, and I no longer recognize the place where I grew up and where I live because I can't afford to live here. And it's really terrifying to me how they have brainwashed the alt-right by all the conspiracy theories and Fox News, because I just hear people, quoting Fox News talking points like your first caller.
Yeah.
I'm glad he even listens to NPR because at least this is a neutral ground. But I honestly... the cost of living here has tripled. There is a million more people in the Tampa Bay area. So I genuinely don't feel safe living here because of Ron DeSantis and because of Trump and because of his followers. I feel in danger for my life. I've had people threaten me on Facebook and wish me dead just because I've been open about speaking about what I believe. To have female reproductive rights, to be able to smoke marijuana legally. These things are that important to me. And Ron DeSantis shut us down and shut us up. And changed the law so that it was 60% when more than half of Floridians voted yes on 3 and yes on 4. So it should be law now. But now we don't have these rights because of the alt-right conservative movement that has paid their way. Elon Musk and all these Fox News representatives and all these Project 2025 people are now going to be running our country. And those of us who are on the other side, which is almost half of the nation and almost half of Florida, to be honest, feel alone and scared. And I'm a massage therapist, so I work with clients every day who are genuinely afraid. I work with people who are suicidal now because they're afraid to live here. They're afraid to exist here. So to the first caller, I say, I am not a weak Democrat, and I voted, and I went out, and I made my voice be heard, and I was shut down. And also, we had to listen to you people bitch and complain for the last 4 years, cause an insurrection, and then vote a rapist and an insurrectionist and a 34-count felon as president again. And now you are the reason that we have to deal with the consequences of that. I have tried to focus on the silver linings. I am glad that, for one thing, there isn't a civil war happening in this country, because if he hadn't won, that's what would have happened. But now I'm preparing myself for World War III and someplace where I can feel safe to exist as a woman and as a minority, because I'm also Jewish. So I do not feel comfortable here. I do not feel safe here. I feel scared in my own home to exist. So, sir, I am not weak. I am strong, and I am a patriot, and I will fight for my rights, and I will stay here for as long as I can until I am no longer safe here.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sierra. Thank you. Very well said. And speaking back to that voice who was trying to minimize you, we're going to see what George has to say in Davenport this time. Can you hear me, George?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you for taking my call again. I want to reiterate what one of your callers said about the Reaganomics. We have not learned our lesson from the past. Reaganomics and all the other types like it don't work. The reason why inflation is high the way it is because the corporations had a green light and they took it. They're not paying any of the taxes. And now when I go to the grocery store, if I want to buy a box of cereal, the box of cereal is the same price, but there's less cereal in the box. Okay, and the same thing with that. I mean, the other day I had to use aluminum foil. It's hardly even aluminum foil. It's like paper. I mean, they've gone everything, but the prices have not gone down.
Right, shrinkflation and lack of great materials in these products, yeah.
Yeah, and they keep on bleeding the American people, the real American people, the ones who are out there working tooth and nail every day. You know, the workforce, the people who actually...
Yeah. He's still there, but it doesn't look like your line is on anymore, so we're going to move forward. But you got the gist of what you were saying. Thank you for that, George. 813-239-9663. This is Community Speaks, and I'm your host, Patrol Mobili, and we're just taking your telephone calls. We're talking about what's going forward. What is the actual mandate? What was the message you were trying to send, especially now in a time when it doesn't look like any problems were actually addressed during the campaign from the other side, from the winning side, because workers are still feeling resentful. Workers still feel like they are not able to make ends meet in the especially going forward, given the ideas that they're hearing bandied about by the new administration. With these new nominees, it looks like we're going to have to focus on what's happening at the top of the economy to get an idea of how people are going to act politically. But there's a lot of resentment out there. There's, especially after the election, not just worker resentment, but voter resentment, that voters feel basically like they're standing alone if, they tried to stop the tide, the right-wing tide in this country, and tried to stop this country from falling into misinformation and not listening to the contradictions about the economic solutions that were being bandied about during the campaign, the contradictions when it comes to inflation and what to expect economically, the basically instability that could be deepening with world wars going on, especially the war between Russia and Ukraine, and how the United States is trying to support Ukraine now, but with the change in administration, the split personality of this country, the new administration may not want to support Ukraine because it wants to support its puppet master, Russia. And it's important that we understand how precarious the situation can be if there isn't leadership here in the United States. And it looks like there are a lot of voters who fell for the lies and who fell for the programming. And now we're going to suffer the consequences because, as I said, resentment, worker resentment, and voter resentment is building in this country. And that doesn't bode well for 2025. 813-239-9663. This is Community Speaks. It's important that we really make sense and sort out what happened. Daryl, thank you for calling me here.
Let me try to sort out what happened quickly, because I know you don't have a lot of time. People, they were mad, they're upset. I know, Mobili, I played a voice. Hot dogs were too high, bread was too high, staples were too high, okay? And they were voting and saying that they forgot that Biden and Harris were digging us, as Democrats always do, out of the hole. And you also had COVID that had hit, and you really had guardrails keeping Donald Trump from doing what he wanted to do, and now he's free to do what he wants to do.
No resistance.
Most of these people, and not all Latinos work in the field, but you'd have migrant workers who pay taxes, who work hard, work for the Lighthouse for the Blind and Low Vision, work on other jobs, helping people, cleaning houses and stuff. They pay their taxes and contribute to this economy, and now you want to empower national. It's not going to be Army at first. National Guard to go around. Let me see your papers. Are you an American citizen? Well, you got so many weeks. You need to report to this internment camp, and we're going to ship you out of the country. And you watch this economy. And well, he's going to give tax breaks, but it's not going to be for Mobili. It's not going to be for Darrell. It's not going to be for the workers at WMNF. It's not going to be for the people at Lighthouse for the Blind. It's not going to be for people who work every day, who are foreign citizens in this nation, okay? Our taxes are going to go up because we got $1 trillion deficit, so many trillions of dollars in a deficit. And he's going to give people like Elon Musk a tax break. Are you kidding me? No, see, people who voted for him and people who went to those rallies and shouting all this kind of stuff, and racist people and bigoted people shouting all this stuff, you ain't feeling it yet. So when it really hits you, I don't want you turning to Al Sharpton. I don't want you turning to Mobili. I don't want you turning to the Sunday Show. I don't want you turning to other people who saying all this other stuff. You voted to put him in. He was only running to escape judicial justice against him. Okay? I want you to remember that. The reason why Donald Trump was running is because he wanted to escape judicial justice. I'm through, Mobili. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Darrell. He ran to get above the law. And a lot of people went on and played along listening to the misinformation and being misinformed about the actual crisis happening in this country that you will feel in 2025, just as workers will feel in 2025. It's going to be a time to talk more about what is going on in our name. And so we're gonna get back to these conversations, but right now we're gonna get on out and make room for the music. We're gonna get back to the music and chill with Blaney Whalen, and she brings us the Music Monday. But first, we're gonna get some more news update from the Scoop. This has been Community Speaks, the Scoop before the Scoop, and I want to thank you for your calls and your emails. And we'll be back to this next week. Keep it tuned right here to WMNF Tampa.
This is Michael Franti, and this